Hawaii is known as a tropical paradise, with millions visiting its pristine beaches and lush jungles every year to escape reality. But for a select few, that escape becomes permanent. Today, we're covering the 10 most mysterious disappearances in Hawaiian history. If you love deep dives into the mysteries, please hit that subscribe button and give hype points. Now, stay on the trail and let's get into it. Picture this. It's a warm, sunny Saturday afternoon in July. You're in a bustling dance studio in suburban Hawaii. There are kids in leotards giggling in the hallway, parents chatting in the parking lot, the smell of hairspray and sunscreen in the air. A 19-year-old dance instructor finishes her class, waves goodbye to her students, and walks toward the back of the building. 15 minutes later, she's gone. Not just missing. Gone. Her car is still in the parking lot. Her purse is on the counter. Her keys are still hanging there. And in the bathroom she was last seen walking into, police will later find forensic evidence of a struggle on the tile. This is the story of Diane Suzuki. And 40 years later, we still don't really know what happened inside that dance studio. Let's set the scene properly. It's July 6th, 1985. Aiea, Oahu. If you've never been, Aiea is not some remote jungle outpost. It's the kind of suburb where kids ride their bikes to 7-Eleven, strip malls, chain restaurants, regular families doing regular Saturday things. Hawaii in the mid-'80s had this specific vibe. Magnum P, I was still on the air. The tourism boom was in full swing, and if you drove down the street with the windows down, you'd hear a mix of local radio, hair metal, and the constant background hum of the trade winds coming off the Pacific. And right in the middle of this perfectly ordinary suburb sits the Rosalie Woodson Dance Academy. It's a busy place. Weekend classes, recitals coming up, parents lined up outside waiting to pick up their kids. This isn't a shady back alley operation. This is a beloved community fixture, the kind of place where nothing bad is supposed to happen. Now, let me introduce you to Diane. Diane Yayo Suzuki. She's 19 years old. She's tiny. 4 feet 11 inches, about 109 pounds, but she's an athlete. A rainbow dancer for the University of Hawaii at Manoa, where she's studying with the dream of becoming a journalist. She works part-time as a dance instructor at Rosalie Woodson, and her students absolutely adore her. She's outgoing, she's ambitious, she's popular. She has a stable family, a bright future, and she doesn't do drugs or run with a bad crowd. And here's the most important thing to remember about Diane on this particular day. She has plans. Immediately after her shift ends, she's supposed to meet up with friends and drive out to the North Shore for the beach. She's excited about it. She's talked about it all week. This is not a girl in crisis. This is not a girl about to disappear into thin air. But she does. And that's where the nightmare begins. Around 3 p.m., Diane wraps up her dance class. Everything is normal. Students file out, parents pull away. Diane steps outside for a moment, and here's a detail we know from witness accounts. She's seen having a brief conversation with an unidentified man standing near a Volkswagen in the parking lot. The chat lasts maybe a minute or two. The man walks away. Diane turns around. She goes back inside the studio. That's it. That's the last confirmed public sighting we have of Diane Suzuki alive. 15 minutes later, 3:15 p.m., Diane's friend pulls into the parking lot. She's the ride to the North Shore. She waits and waits. Diane doesn't come out, so the friend does what anyone would do. She gets out of her car, walks into the studio, and looks around. Nothing. No Diane, no sign of a struggle, just an empty studio. Now, this is where you'd expect a normal explanation. Maybe she stepped out to grab a snack. Maybe she went next door. But her car is still sitting in the parking lot. Her keys, still there. Her purse, still on the counter. Her street clothes, the ones she was going to change into for the beach, still hanging up. Everything a young woman would need to leave the building of her own free will is left behind. And Diane is nowhere. As the hours tick by, Diane's parents start to panic. They know Diane. This is not something she would ever do. So they drive to the studio and park outside, waiting for their daughter to come out. And this is where the story takes its first sharp turn into the unbearably strange. While her parents are sitting there in the parking lot, They see something that at the time seems weird but not necessarily criminal. They watch a man they recognize, Dewey Hamasaki, the studio's photographer, walking out of the building. He's not alone. His father and sister are with him, and together they are hauling a large, extremely heavy trunk out of the studio and loading it into a vehicle. Just remember that image. 3 people, 1 heavy trunk, broad daylight. By 5 p.m., Diane is officially missing. The police get called. The investigation begins. And this is where we get one of the more historic moments in Hawaiian criminal justice, because when detectives search the studio, they decide to try a new forensic technique that has never been used in Honolulu before. It's called luminol. You spray it on a surface, and if there are hidden traces of blood, even blood that's been cleaned up, it lights up under UV light. They spray the studio bathroom, and it lights up. Forensic evidence, hidden evidence, in the exact place Diane was last seen walking toward. Okay, let's pump the brakes for a second, because this is the point in the story where a lot of true crime channels would just say, she was murdered, case closed. But I want us to actually think about this, because when you really examine the pieces of this puzzle, none of the easy explanations hold up. Not one. Let's start with the walkaway theory. The idea that Diane just got tired of her life, ditched everything, and started over somewhere new. People do it. It happens. But look at what she left behind. Her car keys, her purse, her wallet, her ID, her clothes, her family, her university, her dance career. Think about that. If you were a 19-year-old girl planning to run away, would you leave without any money? Without your driver's license? Without a change of clothes? Would you walk out into the world with literally nothing in your pockets? And more importantly, would you make plans to meet a friend in the parking lot in 15 minutes if you knew you were about to vanish forever? Would you tell your family the night before that you were excited about the beach trip? You wouldn't. Nobody would. Diane didn't walk away. Somebody took her or something happened to her inside that building. Okay, so let's go with the obvious theory. Foul play. Somebody attacked her in the bathroom. That's what the blood evidence suggests. But here's where it gets really uncomfortable, because the logistics of that crime are almost impossible. Think about the setting. This is a busy dance academy on a Saturday afternoon. There are still people in the building. There are cars pulling in and out of the parking lot. There are houses across the street. There are neighbors. If somebody attacked a fit, athletic, 19-year-old dancer inside that bathroom, how does she not scream? How does nobody hear a struggle? How does nobody hear anything? And even if, somehow, the attacker managed to overpower her instantly and silently, then what? You've now got a body inside a commercial building in the middle of suburban Oahu in broad daylight. How do you get it out? You'd need a vehicle. You'd need something to conceal the body in. You'd need to do it right in front of anyone who might happen to be watching. And you'd need to do it fast. Now, go back to that image I asked you to remember. 3 people, 1 heavy trunk, broad daylight. Diane's parents watching from the parking lot, having no idea what they were actually seeing. Here's where it gets even worse. When police brought Dewey Hamasaki in for questioning, they noticed something. Fresh scratches. All over his body, deep ones. The kind of scratches you'd expect from somebody who had just fought for their life. When they asked him what happened, his explanation was, let's just say creative. He said he had been attacked by a rooster. Now, roosters can be aggressive, I'll grant you that. But you don't need to be a forensic expert to look at defensive scratch marks all over a grown man's body and think, yeah, that came from a chicken. Investigators didn't buy it either. But here's the thing, and this is what makes this case so heartbreaking. They couldn't prove anything. This was 1985. DNA profiling was still in its infancy. They found blood in the bathroom, but they couldn't test it against Diane. They had a suspect they didn't trust. They had scratches with no explanation. They had a trunk hauled out of the building at the perfect moment, but no body and no forensic smoking gun. Then, months later, investigators executed a search warrant on a pig farm owned by Hamasaki's father. And what they found there was, in a word, chilling. There was a stone wall on the property that had been rebuilt, completely rebuilt, approximately 6 months before the search, perfectly matching the timeline of Diane's disappearance. And when investigators dug beneath a nearby banana tree stump, they pulled up clothing. the exact size and description of what Diane had been wearing the day she vanished, and a black tutu. I don't want to belabor this next point, but I have to say it out loud because it's central to why this case has no ending. There is a grim, ugly reality that any investigator working a pig farm case knows. There is a grim, ugly reality that any investigator working a pig farm case knows. The environment is capable of completely destroying physical evidence, leaving absolutely no trace of a victim behind. In 1993, 8 years after Diane vanished, city prosecutor Keith Conshiro brought this entire case in front of a grand jury. They spent 300 hours going through the evidence, the blood, the scratches, the trunk, the clothes, the rebuilt wall, the tutu, everything. And in the end, the grand jury declined to press charges. Not because they thought Diane just walked away, but because without a body and without the DNA technology to conclusively link the blood in the bathroom to Diane, they didn't have enough to convict. No charges, no trial, no answers. The one thing this case did accomplish, and it's a small comfort, is that it directly led to changes in Hawaii's harassment laws. Stalking became a crime. Temporary restraining order violations became a felony because of Diane. Because everyone knew what had almost certainly happened, and everyone knew the system had failed to catch it in time. Some people initially tried to link Diane's disappearance to the Honolulu Strangler, a serial killer who was actively terrorizing Oahu that exact summer, but it never fit. His victims were bound. They were found. Diane wasn't a stranger abduction. Diane was somebody who was targeted by somebody who knew her routine in the one location where she trusted the walls around her. And that's what I keep coming back to. That's the part that still gets me. She wasn't hiking a remote trail. She wasn't hitchhiking at night. She wasn't in any of the situations we're told to be careful of. She was at her job, in a dance studio, on a Saturday afternoon, 15 minutes before her friend was coming to pick her up. She walked toward the bathroom in a bustling suburban studio full of people, in broad daylight, on a bright Hawaiian afternoon, and she never walked back out. Imagine this. A 6-year-old boy vanishes in the middle of a Hawaiian summer. When police finally come knocking, months after he was last seen, his own father sits across the table and calmly tells them, "Oh, I gave him away to a lady named Auntie Rose at a park on Oahu. No phone number, no address, no paperwork, no follow-up phone call, just, I gave him away." And for the next 20 years, that story would hold. 20 years without a body, 20 years without an arrest, 20 years of a little boy's face on the news, over and over, while a phantom woman named Auntie Rose became one of the most searched-for people in Hawaiian history. This is the story of Peter Boy Kima. And this one isn't just a mystery. It's a scandal, a slow-motion tragedy that everyone saw coming and nobody stopped. Let's set the scene. It's the spring of 1997, the big island of Hawaii. When you picture this place, you probably picture postcards, black sand beaches, volcanoes glowing at night, waterfalls cutting through green cliffs, kids splashing in tide pools. It's the kind of place where mainland families empty out their savings just to spend a week there. But there's another Hawaii, a Hawaii most tourists never see. It's the Hawaii of dirt roads and rusted trailers, of houses set back from the highway behind chain-link fences and overgrown brush. And behind one of those doors in a small home on the Big Island, a little boy was living a life that nobody outside could quite see clearly, and that everyone inside was choosing again and again to look away from. His name was Peter Kema Jr. Everybody called him Peter Boy. He was 6 years old, and by the time he vanished in the spring of 1997, he had already lived a life of pain that most people cannot even bring themselves to imagine. Peter Boy was born in May of 1991. And here's the part that will stick with you. By the time he was 3 months old, he was hospitalized with severe, life-threatening physical injuries, old fractures and new ones layered on top of each other. He was so badly injured that Child Protective Services stepped in and put him in temporary foster care. In 1992, a court-appointed psychologist evaluated the parents and warned in writing that if the children were ever returned to them, they would be at extreme risk. Now, here's where you and I are going to have our first argument with the story. Because in July of 1994, despite the 2,000 pages of abuse documentation, despite the psychological evaluations, despite everything a rational person would look at and say, absolutely not, CPS returned Peter Boy to the custody of his parents. He was 3 years old when he went back. Nobody outside the family would ever see him healthy again. Let's walk through what happened in the months before Peter Boy disappeared, because this is the part that made an entire state furious. January 1997, Peter Boy's grandparents get a look at him, and they see something that alarms them so much that they immediately pick up the phone and call CPS. His arm is severely injured. Badly injured, the kind of injury that any adult would know needs a hospital, not a Band-Aid. The intake worker at CPS starts to fill out a new report, and here's where it gets almost unbelievable. A supervisor tells that intake worker, and I'm not making this up, not to file the report, just don't file it. So they don't. No wellness check, no visit, nothing. April 4th, 1997. A social worker files a formal report. The report says in writing that a relative has seen Peter Boy with a broken arm. And it says something else, something so cruel it's hard to even repeat, that his father was subjecting him to severe, unimaginable forms of psychological and physical punishment. That report lands on someone's desk at CPS, and it just sits there for weeks, because CPS, they said, was short-staffed. Sometime between May and June of 1997, Peter Boy is last seen alive by his young siblings. Nobody knows the exact day. He just stops being there. June 17th, 1997. Finally, CPS assigns an investigator to the April 4th report, 10 weeks late. By the time that investigator shows up, Peter Boy is already gone. August 1997, the police finally get notified. And this is when Peter Kima Sr. tells the story that will define the next 2 decades of this case. He says, calmly, that he flew his son to Oahu. He says he met a woman there, an informal relative, a friend of the family kind of figure, named Auntie Rose. Some accounts have her last name as Makwakane. He says he gave Peter Boy to her. Just handed him over. Informal adoption, no papers, no court, no agency. Just a father, a son, and a stranger in a public park in Honolulu. That's the story. That's the whole story. And for 20 years, without a body, it worked. Okay, let's stop the tape and actually look at this story, because the more you pull on it, the more it falls apart in your hands. Let's start with the Auntie Rose story itself. Just as a parent, just as a human being, think about it. You've got a 6-year-old son, and you decide, for reasons that are never really explained, that you're going to fly him to another island and give him away to a woman you barely know. Okay, let's pretend that's a thing that happens. Wouldn't you get her phone number? Wouldn't you ask for an address? Wouldn't you want to know where your child was going to be living, going to school, sleeping at night? Wouldn't you check in? Wouldn't you call after a week and ask, hey, how's he doing? Is he eating? Is he settling in? Peter Kima Sr. did none of that. Zero. He handed his son over and, according to him, never followed up. Not once. And when his relatives started asking where Peter Boy was, he just kept repeating the Auntie Rose story like a script. Now let's get to the paper trail. Or the lack of one. Because here's the thing. Hawaii is an island chain. You do not just walk from one island to another, you fly. And when you fly, especially with a child, you leave records. You leave passenger manifests. You leave ticket receipts. You leave gate agents who might remember a father and a small boy. Police checked all of it, every airline, every flight log for the relevant time frame. Nothing. There is no record of Peter Kima Sr. flying to Oahu with his son. There is no record of a 6-year-old boy on any manifest that fits the timeline. And when investigators canvassed the park in Honolulu where the alleged handoff supposedly happened, no witnesses came forward. Not a jogger, not a homeless man, not a family having a barbecue. Nobody saw a father hand a small child to a woman who, as far as anyone can tell, does not exist. Because Auntie Rose does not exist. Investigators searched public records, family records, and community records. They asked everyone. They ran the name every way you can run a name. There was no Auntie Rose Makuakani. There has never been an Auntie Rose Makuakani. She was, from the very first sentence out of Peter Kema Sr.'s mouth, a ghost. And here's the horrible, cynical brilliance of the story. Because as long as police had no body, and as long as they couldn't prove Auntie Rose didn't exist beyond a shadow of a doubt, the parents were legally insulated. In American law, you generally need a body, or extraordinary circumstantial evidence, to prosecute a murder. And the Auntie Rose story provided just enough plausible deniability to run out the clock, year after year after year. The parents even kept up appearances during the search. They talked to reporters. They made statements. Peter Boy's face was on posters, on the news, on billboards, and every time investigators pushed them, they pushed back with the same story. Same ghost, same park, same phantom auntie. But here's what nobody talked about publicly for years. There was a witness inside the house, Peter Boy's younger sister, Lena. She was only about 4.5 years old when it happened, and for years she carried this fragmented, half-remembered story that she would tell to police, to therapists, to anyone who would listen. She remembered seeing her brother. She remembered watching her parents try to revive him. And she remembered getting into a car with her father, driving somewhere remote, and watching him bury a small box under a tree. A 4-year-old can't testify to that in a courtroom, not by themselves, not without corroboration, but every investigator who ever heard Lena's account knew, in their gut, exactly what had happened. Then, in 2016, everything finally cracked open. 19 years after Peter Boy vanished, prosecutors, armed with modern digital forensics, financial records, phone records, travel records that hadn't been possible to compile in 1997, finally had enough to bring formal murder charges against both parents. And once the door was open, the wall came down. Jalen Kema, Peter Boy's mother, took a plea deal. And she admitted the truth. There was no Auntie Rose. There was no flight to Oahu. Peter Boy had passed away in that house. He succumbed to a severe, untreated medical emergency. That broken arm, the one his grandparents had reported to CPS back in January, the one that supervisor told the intake worker not to file a report about. Peter Boy had died, essentially, from an injury that the system had known about, had been warned about, and had chosen to ignore. Peter Kema Sr. pled guilty to manslaughter. He admitted to driving his son's body to the remote Puna district of the Big Island and disposing of it. He agreed to lead investigators, including the FBI, to the site. And here's the final gut punch of this story. He couldn't find it. Or he wouldn't find it. 20 years of jungle growth, 20 years of erosion, 20 years of a father who may or may not have actually remembered exactly where he put his son. Investigators searched, they dug, they brought in cadaver dogs, they brought in ground-penetrating radar. They found nothing. Peter Boy's case changed Hawaii. It genuinely did. It's cited alongside other reform cases like Talia's Law as one of the tragedies that forced the state to overhaul its child protective services system. Policies were rewritten. Reporting requirements were tightened. The idea that a supervisor could tell an intake worker not to file a report, that specific loophole, got closed. But none of that brought Peter Boy back. And that's the thing that stays with you about this case, because unlike a lot of missing persons mysteries, we actually know what happened here. We know he died. We know how he died. We know who did it. We even know, roughly, where his body was taken. The mystery isn't who. The mystery is why the world let it happen, why a stack of 2,000 pages of documentation wasn't enough, why a psychologist's warning wasn't enough, why a grandparent's phone call wasn't enough, why a formal report from a social worker sat on a desk for 10 weeks while a little boy's life was tragically cut short in a house that everyone in the system knew about. Peter Boy was 6 years old. He had a bright smile. He had a name that his siblings still say out loud. And somewhere, out in the wet green wilderness of the Puna district, under some tree, in some quiet corner of an island that markets itself as paradise, he is still there. Nobody has ever found him. Picture this. It's a Sunday night in February. You're 27 years old. You're 5 months pregnant. You're finally in that stretch of pregnancy where you can feel the baby move, where you're daydreaming about the nursery, where you're picking out little tiny outfits. You're winding down for bed, and then your phone rings. It's your ex-boyfriend, the father of your unborn child. And he says, "Hey, my truck broke down. Can you drive out to the middle of nowhere, in the dark, on the most dangerous road on the island, and come help me?" And even though every single alarm bell in your body should be going off, you say yes. Because that's who you are. Because he's the father of your baby. Because that's what good people do. You get in your car, you bring your dog, and you drive off into the Black Maui jungle. And nobody ever sees you alive again. This is the story of Charlie Scott. And it is not a mystery about what happened. We know exactly what happened. This is a mystery about how somebody could do this to another human being and almost get away with it. Let's set the scene. Maui, Hawaii, February 2014. If you've ever been to Maui, you've probably heard of the Hana Highway. It's one of those bucket list drives, 60-something miles of switchbacks and one-lane bridges cutting along the northeast coast of the island. During the day, it is genuinely one of the most beautiful roads in the world. Waterfalls pouring off cliffs, bamboo forests, coastal views that look computer-generated. But at night, the Hana Highway is a completely different animal. At night, the jungle closes in on both sides of the road. The canopy is so thick it blocks the moon. There are stretches where you cannot see anything past your headlights. The road hugs cliffs that drop straight into the ocean. There are hairpin turns you have to take at about 10 miles an hour. It rains constantly. And here's the part that really matters. There is no cell service. Not weak service. No service. You get out there past Kiane, past Nahiku, past Nuailua Bay, and you are on your own. If your car breaks down, if you get hurt, if something happens to you, nobody is coming. Nobody knows where you are. Nobody can hear you. That's the road we're talking about. And that's where our story takes place. Now let me tell you about Charlie. Carly Scott, everyone called her Charlie, was 27 years old. She lived in Haiku on Maui. She was 5 months pregnant. She loved her dog Nala, who went absolutely everywhere with her. Everyone who knew her described her the same way: kind, generous, fiercely independent. She was the kind of person who, if you called her at midnight with a flat tire, was already putting her shoes on before you finished the sentence. She was building a life. She was setting up a nursery. She was excited to be a mom. She wasn't in crisis. She wasn't looking to disappear. Every single piece of her life pointed forward. And then, on the evening of February 9th, 2014, her phone rang. The person on the other end of that phone was Stephen Capobianco. He was Charlie's ex-boyfriend, and he was the biological father of the child she was carrying. Here's what Stephen told her. He said his white Toyota 4Runner had broken down somewhere on the Hana Highway, about 3 miles past Kianai, which, if you know the road, is deep. That's not pull over at a gas station deep. That's middle of nowhere in the jungle deep. He said he needed her to drive out and pick him up, or at least come help. Charlie said yes. Around 8:30 p.m., she got into her own vehicle, coincidentally also a Toyota 4Runner. Hers was champagne-colored. She loaded up her dog Nala, and she started driving. She picked Stephen up in Haiku. And then together, in her car, they drove out into the dark to where his truck was supposedly stranded. Now, according to Stephen, they got out there. They fiddled with the battery, they got his truck running again, and sometime between 9:30 and 11:30 that night, they started driving back to Haiku. 2 vehicles. Him in the lead, in his white 4Runner. Her behind him, in her champagne 4Runner, with Nala in the passenger seat. Stephen's story is that at some point, near Twin Falls, he was driving a little faster than her. He lost sight of her headlights in his rearview mirror, and he just assumed she was fine. Just assumed she made it home. And he went to bed. That's the story. Just remember it. He lost her headlights. And he went to bed. The next day, February 10th, Charlie didn't call anyone, which was completely unlike her. Her family started calling around. Nothing. And then Nala, Charlie's dog, was found, wandering, alone, all the way out at the Nahiku marketplace in the middle of nowhere. Now, understand what that means. Nala never left Charlie's side. That dog going home alone was, in and of itself, a scream for help. On February 11th, Charlie's mother went to Stephen's place. She was terrified. She'd been up all night. And she did something incredible. She grabbed a yellow legal pad, slid it across the counter to him, and said, essentially, write it down. Write down exactly what happened last night, minute by minute. And Stephen, standing in a room with a woman whose pregnant daughter was missing, sat down and wrote out a highly detailed, extremely organized, rehearsed-sounding timeline in about 10 seconds. Charlie's family later said he was cold, detached, like a smart aleck, like a man reading off notes. On February 12th, Charlie's car was found. And when I tell you what condition it was in, you're going to know exactly what kind of story we're actually in. Her champagne Toyota 4Runner was located miles away, near the famous Jaws surf break at Piahi. It had been flipped over, and it had been deliberately set on fire to destroy evidence. Cars don't burn themselves. Accidents don't strip tires. Accidents don't relocate vehicles miles away from where they crashed. And then the searchers went into the jungle. And what they found is the part I really don't like telling. In the dense brush around Nuailua Bay, they found Charlie's blanket, a green one. They found her blue polka-dotted tank top. They found her bra. They found her skirt. And then, over the following days, they found smaller things. Physical evidence that she had been there, clumps of red hair, a body piercing, and finally, bone fragments that confirmed the worst. There was no complete body, there never would be, just pieces scattered through the jungle. All right, let's stop and actually think about Stephen Capobianco's story. Because on the surface, it kind of works. Truck broke down, ex came to help, they drove home, he lost sight of her. That's a story. That's a coherent story. The problem is, it collapses the moment you push on any single part of it. Let's start with the broken truck. Stephen claimed his 4Runner broke down on February 8th. Okay, fine. But if you're a young guy on Maui and your truck breaks down, who do you call? Probably a buddy with a truck. Probably somebody who can help you push, tow, jump the battery. Probably somebody you've asked to do this exact favor before. What you don't do, what no reasonable person does, is wait until 8:30 at night, then call your 5 months pregnant ex-girlfriend and ask her to drive out into the darkest, most remote stretch of road on the island to help you. And why nighttime? Why not the middle of the day, when there's other traffic on the road, when it's not pitch black, when if something goes wrong there are witnesses? Why wait until the exact time of day when the Hana Highway becomes an isolation chamber? But it gets worse, because investigators eventually looked into whether Stephen's truck was actually broken down at all. And here's what they found. Surveillance footage from a bank in Paia captured Stephen casually driving his supposedly broken down white SUV on his way to work on the morning of February 9th. That is the same 4Runner that he claimed was sitting dead on the side of the Hana Highway. He was driving it that morning. So the entire premise of the phone call, "My truck is broken, come get me," was already a lie before Charlie ever picked up her keys. Now let's talk about the convoy home. This is the part that, to me, ends the debate. Stephen's story is that he was driving in front of Charlie on the way back, that he lost sight of her headlights near Twin Falls, and that he just went home to bed. Let's actually think about that for a second. You are on the Hana Highway, at night, in the rain, with no cell service. Your 5 months pregnant ex-girlfriend, carrying your child, is following you in another car. You look in your mirror. Her headlights are gone. What does any human being on planet Earth do in that moment? You pull over, immediately. You wait 10 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute. If she still doesn't come around the bend, you turn around. You drive back. You check every switchback, every cliff edge, because that road kills people, because she's carrying your baby, because you are a functional human being with a working nervous system. You do not shrug, keep driving, and go home to sleep. Nobody does that. Nobody does that unless they already know, with total certainty, exactly where she is, because they're the reason she isn't behind them anymore. And then there's the car. The burned, flipped, stripped 4Runner at Jaws. Look, cars roll off the Hana Highway. It happens. Tragically, it happens. But when a car rolls off a cliff in a legitimate accident, it stays where it landed. It doesn't magically travel miles to a completely different surf break. It doesn't lose its tires, and it certainly doesn't spontaneously combust. Fire is deliberate. Fire is somebody trying to destroy evidence. DNA, fingerprints, biological material, everything that a forensic team could otherwise pull out of that vehicle. And then there's the forensic detail from the jungle that I still can't shake. When forensic entomologists examined the physical evidence left on Charlie's blanket, they were able to determine that the remains had been moved, manipulated, over multiple days. Somebody kept coming back. Somebody kept returning to the site to rearrange, to hide, to cover. And when investigators pulled Stephen's cell phone data, guess where his phone pinged over the following days? Nuailua Bay. Over and over. The exact area where Charlie's body was scattered. He kept going back. Stephen Capobianco was arrested. He was charged with second-degree murder and arson. And in one of the most publicized trials in modern Hawaiian history, he was convicted on both counts. The judge handed down an enhanced sentence, life in prison, after the jury made a specific finding that the crime was especially heinous, atrocious, and cruel. The prosecution's theory, which the jury accepted, was simple and devastating. Stephen didn't want to be a father. He didn't want the responsibility. He didn't want the child support. He didn't want the tie to Charlie. So he engineered a lie, a broken-down truck, that would lure the one person kind enough to drive out and help him into the one place on the island where nobody could hear her scream. And once he had her out there, alone in the dark at the end of the road, he made sure she never came back. But here's the thing that stays with you about this case. Even after the trial, even after the conviction, even after 12 jurors agreed on what happened, the rest of Charlie Scott has never been found. Just those scattered pieces in the brush at Nuailua Bay. The rest of her is still out there somewhere, in the jungle, in the ocean, in some spot only one person knows. She was 27 years old. She was 5 months pregnant. She was building a nursery. She loved her dog. And she died because she was the kind of person who, when someone called her for help, said yes. That's the whole story. That's what got her killed. Kindness in the wrong direction, at the wrong time, on the darkest road in the world. Imagine flying across an ocean to find yourself. You've shaved your head. You've taken a vow of silence. You've traded your guitar and your amp and your indie rock band for a backpack and a one-way ticket to paradise. You land on the most beautiful island in the world. You spend one night in a hostel. And the next morning, you call a taxi. The taxi pulls up, you climb in, you get dropped off somewhere, and then nothing. Nothing on your phone, nothing on your credit card, nothing withdrawn from the $8,000 sitting untouched in your bank account back home. No body, no backpack, no trace. Just a young man who wanted to disappear into paradise, and paradise, apparently, said yes. This is the story of Alex Gum. And the deeper you go into it, the less it looks like a mystery. And the more, it starts to look like something Alex actually planned. Let me tell you a little about Kauai. Because to understand this case, you have to understand this island. Kauai is the oldest, greenest, and most remote of the main Hawaiian islands. They call it the Garden Isle, and the nickname does not lie. It rains constantly on the interior. Waterfalls just appear out of cliff walls like somebody turned on a faucet. The Na Pali coast is this 2,000-foot vertical wall of green plunging into a churning blue ocean. It's the kind of place they filmed Jurassic Park because it looks like dinosaurs should still be there. But Kauai has a different reputation among a very specific kind of traveler. If you're a spiritual seeker, if you're a backpacker, if you're a New Age wanderer looking for a place to disconnect and find yourself, Kauai is legendary. There are entire subcultures of people who fly here specifically to walk into the jungle and never come out, at least not the same person they were when they walked in. There are off-grid encampments back in the Kalalau Valley. There are drifters who move between hostels. It is a place where you can genuinely, actually, literally disappear if you want to. And that fact, That Kauai is a magnet for people who want to vanish is going to matter a lot in a minute. Now, let's talk about Alex. Alex Gumm was 25 years old. He grew up in a small mill town in Maine, about as far, culturally and geographically, from a tropical island as you can get in the continental U.S. He was an indie rock musician, a skateboarder, creative, smart, sensitive. But in the months leading up to February 2018, something in Alex started to shift. And this is where you have to pay attention, because none of this is small. Alex didn't just get into yoga. He got into esoteric Eastern philosophy, alchemy, ascension. He got into the idea, seriously, that a human being could reach a state of spiritual enlightenment so profound that they could transition into the afterlife without physically dying. He talked about it out loud, to friends. And then he stopped talking, because he took a vow of silence. He shaved his head. He went vegan. He communicated only when absolutely necessary, and even then, minimally. And then, without much of a goodbye, without much of an explanation, he asked his father to drop him off at a bus depot in Maine, carrying only a backpack. That was February 21st, 2018. Alex flies into Kauai. He lands at Lihue Airport on the eastern side of the island. And he does what a lot of backpackers do. He heads to Kapa, which is a small coastal town about 10 miles up the road, and he checks into the Kauai Beach House Hostel. Now, I want you to picture this hostel for a second, because it fits perfectly into the vibe we're building. This isn't a Marriott. This isn't a resort. It's an open-air backpacker crash pad right on the beach. Alex sleeps on a lanai, basically an open-air porch overlooking the ocean. He's surrounded by other transient young people, backpackers, surfers, wanderers. He's exactly the kind of demographic that comes here, and he blends right in. He spends one night. That's it. One night on that lanai. Then, on the morning of February 23rd, he tries to call 2 different taxi companies to pick him up from the hostel. Neither company has a record of successfully dispatching a driver. Now that could mean a lot of things. It could mean the calls didn't connect. It could mean he was picked up off the books. It could mean he decided to walk. We don't know. The next day, February 24th, Alex makes a phone call from the hostel. And after that call, he walks out the front door, backpack over his shoulder. And that is the last confirmed moment of Alex Gumm's life that anybody can verify. He never uses his phone again, not once. He never uses his bank card again, not once. He never checks in with his family, not once. He just evaporates. Back in Maine, his family starts to worry. And this is a critical detail, because even during his vow of silence phase, Alex still communicated with his mother. He'd send a short message, a single word, something. The complete silence is what tells them something is wrong. They contact the police, they alert Kauai authorities, and that's when investigators start digging into the paper trail Alex left behind. They pull his financial records, and they find something that reframes the entire case. Alex Gumm had approximately $8,000 sitting in his bank account, untouched. From the moment he stepped out of that hostel, not a single cent has ever been withdrawn. A year later, spring of 2019, Alex's friends actually fly to Kauai themselves. They do a boots-on-the-ground search, they put up posters, they talk to locals. And during that search, they get one lead that gives them hope. A tip comes in that a man matching Alex's exact description, same build, same look, same recently shaved head, was spotted at a local restore on Kauai purchasing camping gear. It's plausible. It's not confirmed, but it's plausible. And then the trail goes cold again. All right. Now let's actually sit down and interrogate the theories, because this is one of those cases where every explanation you can think of has a hole in it, and the holes tell us more than the theories do. Theory number 1, and this is the one investigators lean toward the hardest, is that Alex went off the grid, voluntarily. That he hiked into the Kalalau Valley or one of the other remote areas of Kauai and joined the counterculture squatters living out there off the land. And there's a lot supporting this. He was researching Lemuria, the mythical lost continent that some New Age communities believe is buried underneath Kauai. He was searching on his computer for how to identify safe drinking water sources in the Hawaiian ecosystem. He was researching foraging, wild plants, edible fruits. He was, in every measurable way, preparing to walk into a jungle and not come back. But here's the thing. Here's the giant, screaming, impossible-to-ignore hole in that theory. If you are 25 years old and you have made the deliberate decision to abandon modern society and you are planning to survive off the land in one of the most brutal wilderness environments in the world, why would you leave $8,000 sitting in your bank account? Think about that number. $8,000. That's a tent. That's a hammock. That's a machete. That's a water filtration system. That's a year's worth of dried food. That's enough to buy yourself into an off-grid community. That's a real, meaningful amount of money for anyone, but especially for a 25-year-old musician from a small town in Maine. People who go off the grid almost universally drain their accounts first. They pull out cash, they buy supplies, they convert their assets into gear. Alex did the opposite. He took the cash he had on him, presumably a small amount, and walked into the wilderness with essentially nothing. That's not starting a new life. That's not living off the grid. That's something else, something more final. Okay, theory number 2, foul play. Somebody at the hostel targeted him. Somebody in that taxi took advantage of him. Somebody in the transient population of Kauai realized this was a naive kid with money and a vow of silence, and they made him disappear. But here's the problem with that theory. If somebody killed Alex to rob him, why did they never touch his money? His bank account is his most valuable asset. His debit card, his credit cards, his ATM access, all of it completely dormant. From February 2018 to today, not a single fraudulent charge, not a single withdrawal. If a criminal took him out for financial reasons, they were the worst financial criminal in history because they left the bag of gold sitting right there and walked away. All right, theory 3. The wilderness got him. He went for a spiritual hike. He got in over his head. And Kauai, which does kill hikers, that's a real fact, claimed him. Cliff fall, flash flood, starvation, and this one is plausible on paper. Kauai kills people every year. The Kalalau Trail alone has a body count that would shock most tourists. But here's what breaks that theory too. Kauai is not a lifeless island. It is crawling with hikers. Helicopter tours crisscross the interior every single day. Search and rescue teams know these trails intimately. If Alex went out on any of the popular routes, somebody, a hiker, a pilot, a park ranger, a boar hunter, would have found something. A backpack, a shoe, a camera, a skeleton, anything. It has been years now, and there's nothing. No physical trace, zero. And then there's the theory that his own friends whispered about, the one nobody wanted to say out loud. Given what Alex actually believed, given his repeated statements about wanting to ascend into the afterlife without physical death, given his obsession with Lemuria, given his belief that Kauai sat on top of some ancient spiritual vortex, given the deliberate financial abandonment, some of his closest friends have suggested that Alex's intense spiritual quest may have led him to take deliberate permanent action to sever his ties with the physical world, though his exact fate remains unconfirmed. I'm not endorsing that theory. I'm just telling you it exists. And I'm telling you the people saying it are the people who knew him best. Here's the thing about Kauai, and really about Hawaii in general. It attracts a very specific kind of seeker. People who come here believing that the land itself is going to fix something in them. People who believe that if they can just get far enough into the jungle, far enough into the ocean, far enough away from the world they came from, they'll find some kind of answer. But the land doesn't care about any of that. The jungle doesn't know you're on a spiritual journey. The ocean doesn't know you took a vow of silence. The Kalalau Valley doesn't reward you for shaving your head. The land is completely, brutally, silently indifferent to your inner life. It will kill a seeker just as fast as it will kill a tourist. Faster sometimes, because the seeker walks in unprepared, convinced that the universe is on their side. Former Kauai Police Chief Brian Fujiuchi said something once about people like Alex. He said drifters actively engineer their lives to avoid detection, and that even if the police did find someone like that, all they could really do was ask them to call their mom. Because in America, adults are legally allowed to disappear. Vanishing is not a crime. And that's kind of where Alex's case sits, in this awful, quiet, legal gray zone. where officially he might still be alive. He might be sitting on a beach somewhere on the Kalalau coast, silent and skinny and free. He might have found the exact life he was looking for. But every day that his bank account stays untouched, every day his family's calls go unanswered, every day another year passes without a photograph, without a sighting, without a whisper, the quieter and more permanent his silence becomes. A young musician from Maine got in a cab on a Kauai morning. He asked to be taken somewhere. He stepped out, and then he stepped off the map entirely. Picture this. It's before dawn on a March morning in 1977. You're standing on a rocky beach on an island that the United States Navy has been using for decades as a live-fire bombing range. The ground behind you is cratered. Twisted metal from spent ordnance sticks up out of the red dirt like the ribs of something that died a long time ago. In front of you is one of the roughest stretches of open ocean in the entire Hawaiian archipelago. Small craft warnings are up. The wind is howling, and you have a choice. You can stay on the bombing range and wait to be captured, or worse, wait for the next round of shells to come down on your head, or you can grab a surfboard and try to paddle across an 8-mile channel of black, freezing, churning ocean in the dark. Two young men made that choice. They picked up their boards, they walked into the surf, and they vanished off the face of the earth. This is the story of George Helm Jr. and Kimo Mitchell. And almost 50 years later, we still don't know what really happened to them out there. To understand this case, you have to understand the island in the middle of it, Kaho'olawe. It sits about 7 miles off the southern coast of Maui, a small, dry, wind-scoured island that in ancient Hawaiian tradition is considered sacred. It's associated with the god Kanaloa, the god of the ocean. There are ancient shrines out there, fishing grounds, cultural sites. In 1977, none of that mattered to the United States military, because for over 30 years by that point, Kaho'olawe wasn't a sacred island. It was called the Target Isle. The U.S. Navy had been using it since World War II as a live-fire bombing range. Battleships would sit offshore and shell it, planes would fly in and drop ordnance on it. The island had been so relentlessly bombed for so long that entire mountains had been reshaped. Craters everywhere, unexploded shells scattered across the ground. It was, essentially, a national sacrifice zone. And by the mid-1970s, a movement had risen up to stop it. The Protect Kaho'olawe, Ohana, the PKO, was leading a growing wave of Native Hawaiian activism. This was the Hawaiian Renaissance in full swing. Language, culture, land rights, sovereignty. And the fight to stop the bombing of Kaho'olawe had become the beating heart of that movement, which brings us to our two men, George Helm Jr. He was 26 years old, and to say George Helm was charismatic is to sell him short. He was electric, he was a philosopher, he was a poet, he was a musician with a hauntingly beautiful falsetto voice. Genuinely one of the great voices of Hawaiian music. He was the president of the PKO. He was the face of the movement, and he was rapidly becoming a political force that the establishment on the mainland could not ignore. When George Helm walked into a room, powerful people paid attention. And then there was Kimo Mitchell, 25 years old. If George Helm was the voice, Kimo Mitchell was the body. He was a National Park Service ranger at Haleakala. He was an elite athlete. He was a legendary waterman. And I want you to hear that word, waterman, because in Hawaii it means something very specific. It doesn't mean he could swim. It means the ocean was his home. He grew up throwing nets, hunting fish, riding swells that would kill most people. Kimo Mitchell wasn't afraid of the water. The water knew him. These are the two men we're about to lose. Let's rewind a few weeks. January 30th in 1977. A group of PKO activists lands on Kaho'olawe as an act of civil disobedience. Two of them, Walter Ritta and Richard Sawyer, decide to stay. They hide deep in the island's crater. They plan to occupy the island for as long as they can, right in the middle of an active bombing range as a form of protest, and they end up staying for 35 days. Now, back on Maui, George Helm and his allies start to panic. Because the bombing hasn't stopped, shells are still coming down. Nobody knows if Walter and Richard are alive or dead. Nobody's heard from them in weeks. So George decides he's going to lead a rescue mission. On March 5th, 1977, at 2 in the morning, George Helm, Kimo Mitchell, and a third man named Billy Mitchell, no direct relation, load a small boat with surfboards and slip across the channel to Kaho'olau. They land in the dark. They start searching the crater. But here's the thing. They didn't know it, but the two men they had come to rescue had already been found and extracted by the military days earlier. So George and Kimo and Billy were now on an active bombing range, searching for people who weren't there. They spend 2 days on the island, searching, waiting, trying to stay clear of active ordnance zones, and they've made an arrangement. A friend named Sluggo Han is supposed to bring a boat over on March 7th to pick them up. March 7th arrives, and Sluggo Han doesn't. The extraction never comes. Now they've got a problem. Because they are 3 men stranded on an actively targeted island with limited food, limited water, and every hour that passes is another hour they might get shelled. They wait, and no boat appears. So around 3 in the morning, in the pitch black of the pre-dawn, they make a decision that is either the bravest or the most desperate thing you can imagine. They've got 2 surfboards, they've got a pair of fins, that's it. And they're going to try to paddle across the Alalakeki Channel, that violent, ripping stretch of ocean between Kaho'olau and Maui, and get themselves home. They walk into the surf. Almost immediately, the ocean shows them what they're dealing with. The waves are pounding the shoreline. In the process of getting past the shore break, George Helm takes a hit, a bad one, and sustains a deep gash to his head. He's bleeding, in salt water, in the dark. At some point, the 3 men realize they're in over their heads. The currents in the Alalakeki are unforgiving even on a calm day. And this is not a calm day. Billy Mitchell takes the longboard and turns back toward Kaho'olau. He's going to try to get back to the island and find help. As he's turning around, he looks back over his shoulder. He sees George and Kimo together, clinging to a surfboard somewhere out near the tiny crescent islet of Molokini. That's the last time any human being ever sees George Helm Jr. or Kimo Mitchell alive. All right, this is where we have to slow down and look at this hard. Because the official story is very neat. Rough water, bad conditions, 2 men drowned, tragedy, end of story. But the more you actually push on the details, the messier the neat story gets. Let's start with Kimo Mitchell. Because this is the piece I cannot let go of. Kimo Mitchell was not an amateur. He was not a weekend warrior. He was, by every account of everyone who knew him, one of the strongest watermen of his generation. He worked as a park ranger in an environment where his life depended on his water skills. He knew these currents. He knew this channel. He knew how to handle a board in heavy surf. To buy the official story, you have to believe that a man like Kimo Mitchell just slipped off a board and drowned in the water he grew up in. Watermen of his caliber don't drown quietly. They fight, they ride currents, they know how to conserve energy, they know how to find flotation. Something happened out there that overwhelmed even Kimo's abilities, and the official story doesn't really explain what that something was. But here's where the case gets genuinely strange. Because remember Sluggo Han, the friend who was supposed to come get them? The reason they had to paddle in the first place? Investigators later found Sluggo Han's boat. It was sitting on the bottom of the ocean off the pier in Kihei, Maui. And when they pulled it up and examined it, they found something that has haunted the PKO ever since. The bilge plugs, the little plugs that keep water from flooding into the boat, had been intentionally pulled out. Somebody had deliberately scuttled the boat. Somebody had made absolutely sure that Sluggo Han was not going to pick up George Helm and Kimo Mitchell now. Let's think about what that means. Somebody on Maui knew that boat was supposed to make that trip, and that somebody didn't want it to happen. Which means the paddle across the channel, the paddle that killed these 2 men, was not a bad decision made freely. It was a decision that was forced on them by whoever pulled those plugs. And it gets stranger because a week before this rescue mission, George Helm did something that his family remembers to this day. He gathered them together, and he told them in this quiet, almost mystical way that his time was short, that he was about to expose some people, that he was about to reveal things happening behind closed doors. He journaled about it. He knew on some level that the more powerful he became politically, the bigger the target on his back got. And then there's the military presence. This is the piece nobody talks about enough. Kaho'olo was not some abandoned rock. It was one of the most surveilled pieces of geography in the Pacific in 1977. There were Navy patrols, Coast Guard boats, radar installations, observation posts. The channel between Maui and Kaho'olawe was actively watched. So ask yourself, how do two of the most publicly recognizable Native Hawaiian activists in the entire state paddle away from a militarized bombing range on surfboards, cross an 8-mile channel that is being actively monitored, and not get seen? Not by a patrol boat, not by a helicopter, not by radar, not by a fisherman, not by anyone, ever. Because either the military didn't see them, which stretches belief in a heavily monitored zone, or the military did see them, and something happened out there that nobody in a uniform ever put in a report. The official story wants us to believe they just drowned. The evidence is more complicated than that. There is one small, strange, beautiful moment I want to leave you with before we close this out, because it's part of the story, whether you believe it or not. In the days after George and Kimo vanished, George's brother Adolf illegally landed on Kaho'olawe, looking for them. He couldn't find them either, and to escape being captured by the Navy, he had to swim back across the channel to Maui in the dark, alone. The exact stretch of ocean that had just killed his brother. Adolf said that as he was swimming, 2 large akule, Hawaiian big-eyed scad fish, appeared on either side of him, and they stayed with him the whole way. He said they were so close he could touch them. They didn't leave until he reached the safety of Maui. Adolf maintains to this day that those 2 fish were his brother and Kimo, guiding him home across the water that took them. I'm not going to tell you what to make of that. I'm just going to tell you it's part of the story. Here is what we know for sure. George Helm Jr. and Kimo Mitchell were never found. No bodies, no boards, no fins, no gear, nothing. The Alalakiki Channel kept every single physical trace of them, but their sacrifice did not disappear with them, because within a few years of their deaths, the movement they had led surged. The bombing of Kaho'olawe finally stopped in 1990. In 1994, the island was formally returned to the state of Hawaii and placed in trust for the native Hawaiian people. The unexploded ordnance is still being cleared decades later. But the bombing stopped. The desecration stopped. The island is being healed. George Helm and Kimo Mitchell won. They just didn't live to see it. A brilliant young leader with a haunting voice and a fierce young waterman who knew every current in the sea paddled out into the dark on a March morning in 1977 to save their sacred land. And the ocean, which had been their ally, their home, their god, took them and kept its silence. 50 years on, we're still waiting for the water to speak. Picture this. It is one of the busiest tourist parks on the island of Maui in the middle of July, at the height of tourist season. There are families with strollers, Instagram influencers taking selfies at the black sand beach, retired couples in matching visors, hikers with GoPros, tour buses idling in the parking lot, cameras everywhere, thousands of eyes. And in the middle of that constant, unbroken flow of humanity, a 23-year-old woman from San Diego parks her rental car, locks the doors, slings a small backpack over her shoulder, and walks away. Days later, that rental car is still sitting in the same spot, untouched. Inside are her suitcase, her clothes, her ID, and her credit cards. The only things missing are her phone, her backpack, and the physical key to the car. In a park full of tourists, with cameras in every direction, she has disappeared without a scream, without a photograph, without a witness. This is the story of Kiara Henry. And it should not be possible. Let me set the scene, because the setting is the whole story here. Wainapanapa State Park sits at the very end of the famously winding Hana Highway on the eastern side of Maui. If you've done research on any Hawaii trip in the last decade, you've seen this place 1,000 times without knowing it. It's the postcard park, the one with the black sand beach, the one with the lava tubes, the one where the coast is jagged with these ancient volcanic cliffs that drop straight into an ocean that's just churning white and blue. By July 2019, this park was completely overrun with tourists. This is peak season. This is the exact moment on the calendar when Maui is packed shoulder to shoulder with visitors from the mainland. Waianapanapa is one of those places you have to see. Everybody's there, everybody's taking pictures, everybody's posting them. The parking lot is full, the beach path is crowded, the trailheads are humming with foot traffic all day long. But, and this is important, Waianapanapa has a dark side. The park is beautiful, but the terrain is genuinely lethal if you step off the marked paths. The lava rock is called Ai, and it's razor sharp. It'll shred a pair of hiking boots. The ocean here doesn't gently lap at the shore, it slams. The waves come in violent, unpredictable sets that can pull you off a cliff before you've even registered what's happening. There are blowholes hidden in the coastline where the ocean has carved its way up through the rock and it just erupts unpredictably, straight up. And in July, the weather flips on you constantly. Bright sun, then sudden downpour, then sun again. Rain that erases footprints within minutes. That's the environment. Beautiful, crowded, and deceptively brutal. Now let me tell you about Kiara. Kiara Lavinia Henry, 23 years old, from San Diego, California. She's small, 5 feet 2 inches, maybe 5 feet 3 inches, about 100 pounds, but she's athletic. She's got wavy brown hair, brown eyes, and a really distinctive tattoo on her upper right arm, a sunflower with praying hands above it. She's traveling alone, which is a thing a lot of young women in her age group do now, and she's doing it well. She's got her stuff together. She checked into a nice hotel in Kihei called the Aston Maui Hill. She's booking guided tours instead of wandering off on sketchy solo hikes. She's paying attention. She's being smart. And here is the thing that really matters. She had a return flight home, booked, confirmed, for July 29th. She had a hotel booking she was trying to extend into the following week. She was making plans, forward-facing plans. She had a life waiting for her back in San Diego, and she was heading back to it. This is not a woman on the run. This is a normal 23-year-old having a really nice solo vacation. Here's how it unfolds. July 18th, 2019. Kiara arrives on Maui and checks into her hotel in Kihei, July 19th. She takes a guided Hana tour, a bus tour that stops at various points along that coast, including Waianapanapa State Park. And this is where a small detail gets important later. Kiara reportedly falls in love with Waianapanapa. It made an impression on her. She wants to go back. July 20th, she takes another guided tour, waterfalls in East Maui, including a stop at Twin Falls, normal tourist stuff, enjoying her trip. July 21st, this is the day everything falls apart. At 11:04 in the morning, Kiara's cell phone connects to Wi-Fi for the last time. After that specific minute, her phone is done. No more pings, no more activity, no more connection to the network. The device is offline forever. At around 2 p.m., security cameras at the Kahului Airport Hertz facility catch her renting a black Nissan Sentra. She's alone. She rents the car for exactly 1 day. That detail is going to matter. Sometime that afternoon, she tries to book a hotel room back in Kihei for the following week, July 22nd through July 29th, right up to her flight home. She also confirms her return flight, and after that, her bank and credit card activity stops permanently. Not another purchase, not another ATM withdrawal, nothing. She then drives that rental car straight to Waianapanapa State Park. Investigators later checked the odometer on the Nissan Sentra when it was recovered, and the mileage matches exactly what you'd expect from a direct drive from the Kahului Airport to the state park. She didn't run errands. She didn't stop to eat. She didn't drive around. She went straight there. And then she vanishes. July 23rd. Park officials notice the black Nissan sitting in the gravel lot. It's been there a while. It looks abandoned. July 25th. The car still hasn't moved. Park officials file a suspicious activity report with the Maui police. July 26th. The rental agency has the vehicle towed back to Hertz in Kahului. That same day, back in California, Kiara's sister files a missing persons report because nobody in her family can reach her. July 29th. Kiara's flight to San Diego departs. She's not on it. Then, in August and September, massive search operations kick off. We're talking helicopters, jet skis, K-9 units, Maui Search and Rescue, the Search Tech Advisory Team, hundreds of hours of ground effort, and they find absolutely nothing. Not a footprint, not a scrap of clothing, not the phone, not the backpack, not the key, not a body, not a trace of Kiara Henry anywhere. Okay, let's break this apart because when you actually look at the interior of that rental car, the whole thing gets very strange, very fast. When Hertz personnel inspected the Nissan Sentra after they towed it, here's what they found. Her luggage, inside the car. Her clothing, inside the car. Her ID, hidden inside the center console. Her sole credit card, also hidden inside the center console. And here's the piece I want you to hold on to. She had used that credit card almost daily up until the day she disappeared. Small purchases, ATM withdrawals, normal tourist spending. She used that card constantly. And then she deliberately hid it in the center console before she got out of the car. Think about that for a second. What was she hiding it from? Who was she hiding it from? A woman who has been using her card every day suddenly decides to lock her only credit card and her only ID in a hidden compartment of a rental car in a public parking lot before walking off. That is not a spontaneous decision. That is a deliberate action, taken because she was thinking about somebody or something going through that car while she was gone. Now let's talk about what she took with her. Her cell phone, her small black backpack, and the rental car key. Let's start with the runaway theory, because this is the one you're going to hear online. The idea that Kiara just decided to walk away from her life and start over in Maui. But look at what she left behind. Every single thing you would need to start a new life anywhere. Her ID, her credit card, her luggage, her clothing, her plane ticket. She left the tools of survival in the car and walked into the jungle with essentially nothing. That's not a fresh start. That's the opposite of a fresh start. And more importantly, she had actively booked accommodations for the following week. She had confirmed her flight home. Nobody who is planning to disappear takes the time to reconfirm a return flight 10 hours before they vanish. Also, and this is the detail that really destroys the runaway theory for me, if you're abandoning the car forever, why on earth would you take the rental car key with you? The key is useless. It's a piece of plastic that only opens one specific vehicle. The only reason a hiker takes a rental car key with them is because they're planning to come back to the car. Which means whatever Kiara thought she was doing when she walked away from that Nissan Sentra, she believed she'd be back. Okay, theory 2, accidental fall. She slipped on the lava rock. She got sucked into a blowhole. A rogue wave pulled her off the cliff. And I have to be honest with you, this is the theory investigators lean toward the hardest, and it's not without merit. Waianapanapa really does kill people. The rocks are lethal. The ocean is aggressive. It happens. But here's the thing. This park was packed. It was July. Peak season, thousands of tourists per day. If a 23-year-old woman fell into the ocean, or fell into a lava tube, or got swept off a cliff, how does not a single one of those thousands of people hear a scream? See a splash, notice a person go over the edge, see a stray backpack rolling in the surf? Waianapanapa is one of the most photographed parks in Hawaii. There are cameras out constantly. And in the days around July 21st, not one photograph, not one video, not one witness statement puts Kiara anywhere in the park. And even if she did fall in the ocean, where's the backpack? Where's the phone? Where's the key? Backpacks float, phones wash up. In an ocean current that consistently pushes debris toward shore, something should have come back. Nothing did. Theory 3, foul play. Somebody grabbed her. But now you've got the reverse problem. How does an attacker single out a specific young woman in a packed tourist park in the middle of the day, overpower her, and remove her from one of the most heavily trafficked coastal locations on the island without a single tourist noticing? Without a single witness? Without a struggle picked up in the background of somebody's Instagram video, without her being seen being led away. And there's the layered anomaly of that hidden ID in the console. If Kiara was uneasy enough about somebody that she deliberately concealed her identification before walking away from the car, then maybe she wasn't grabbed by a stranger in the park. Maybe she was meeting somebody there, somebody she had reason not to fully trust, somebody who promised her a place to stay for the night, which would explain why she had no hotel reservation in Hana for July 21st, despite rejecting her Kihei hotel that same day. But if that's true, who? Investigators never publicly identified a suspect. There's no name in the record, just the void. This is the part that stays with me about Kiara's case. Waianapanapa is not the Alakai swamp. It's not the Kalala Valley. It's not some remote wilderness where you can imagine a person just vanishing into the void. It's a state park with paved paths, restrooms, tour buses, and thousands of visitors a day. It's the kind of place where you can barely walk 5 feet without being in the background of someone else's vacation photo. And yet, somehow, in that park, on that specific afternoon, in the middle of tourist season, a healthy 23-year-old woman managed to slip through the cracks of collective attention so completely that no one saw her arrive at the trailhead, no one saw her on the beach, no one saw her at the blowholes, no one saw her fall, no one saw her leave, and no one saw whatever it was that happened next. She parked her Nissan Sentra in a busy gravel lot on a bright July afternoon. She hid her ID and her credit card in the center console for reasons only she knew. She slung a small black backpack over her shoulder. She took her phone and the car key. She locked the doors, and she walked off the edge of the earth. Her plane left without her. Her family is still waiting, and the black sand beach at Waianapanapa keeps its secret to this day. Picture this: a prepared, experienced 27-year-old hiker who grew up in Hawaii. He knows the terrain. He's packed for the day. He tells his father exactly where he's going, exactly what trail he's hiking, and exactly what time he'll be back. He drives to one of the most photographed valley overlooks on the Big Island. He parks his car in a public lot. He gets out. He asks a stranger where the nearest bathroom is, and then he vanishes into thin air. For the next 24 days, over 100 expert searchers, rappellers dropping down 2,000-foot cliffs, thermal drones scanning the canopy, K-9 units combing the brush, helicopters flying grid patterns overhead, will pour themselves into one of the most intense civilian search operations in modern Hawaiian history. And in all of that effort, across all of those days, they will find exactly one thing: nothing. Not a scrap of clothing, not a snapped branch, not a dropped water bottle, not a single physical trace that Kyle Britton was ever there at all. This is a case that should not be possible in 2019. And yet, here we are. Let's start with where this happens. Because to understand this case, you have to understand Waipio Valley. Waipio sits on the northern Hamaka coast of the Big Island. Ancient Hawaiians called it the Valley of the Kings, and it's not just a nice nickname. It was literally the political and spiritual center of ancient Hawaii for centuries. Kings were born there. Kings were buried there. It is considered one of the most sacred places on the island chain. But sacred is not the same as safe. And when you actually look at Waipio geographically, you start to understand why almost nobody actually lives down there today. The valley is a mile wide and about 6 miles deep. The walls surrounding it are sheer, vertical, 2,000-foot cliffs of dark volcanic rock draped in green. To get down into the valley, you have to descend a road with a 25% grade. It's so steep that the county requires a 4-wheel drive vehicle just to attempt it. Once you're on the valley floor, you're in a completely different world. Thick tropical rainforest, muddy taro patches, wild rivers cutting through the terrain, and the canopy up above is so dense that in some spots, direct sunlight barely reaches the ground even at noon. Cell service? Practically non-existent. The valley is a bowl surrounded by mountains, and there's essentially one cell tower servicing the entire area. Once you drop below the rim, the modern world stops working. And the specific route Kyle was planning to take that day is called the Z Trail. It's called that because from the air, it looks like a giant letter Z, a series of switchbacks carved directly into the side of one of those sheer cliff walls. It's a genuinely grueling hike, Loose rock, sudden drops, steep grades, mist that rolls in without warning and reduces visibility to almost nothing. Even experienced local hikers will tell you the Z-Trail commands respect. Now let me tell you about Kyle, because Kyle is not the guy you'd expect to lose on this trail. Kyle Britton, 27 years old, a local. He lived in Hilo. He'd just finished massage therapy school at Kapiolani Community College in Honolulu, and he was staying at his family's home in Hilo while his father and stepmother were away on their honeymoon. He was in great shape, 5 feet 11 inches, about 145 pounds, an experienced hiker, completely comfortable in Hawaiian tropical terrain. He'd been out on trails his whole life. Mentally, this was a guy in a really good headspace. He'd just finished school. He was preparing for his professional board exams. He was watching the family house. And this day hike, this was his idea of clearing his head before sitting down to study. This was self-care. This was fun. So no red flags, no inexperience, no crisis, no warning signs, just a fit, prepared local hiker heading out for a day trip on a trail he'd never done before, but well within the range of his abilities. The night before, August 29th, Kyle calls his dad. They chat. Kyle casually mentions his plan for the next day, a solo hike up the Z-Trail in Waipio Valley, heading toward the neighboring Waimanu Valley. He's got his itinerary, he's got his gear, he's got his head on straight. August 30th, 6 a.m. Kyle leaves home in Hilo, drives north up the Hamakua coast toward the valley. Sometime that morning, he arrives at the Waipio Valley Lookout. This is the big scenic overlook at the top, where all the tour buses stop, where all the tourists get out to take pictures. And here is the last confirmed human interaction Kyle Britton ever has. He walks up to a bystander at the lookout, and he asks, I am not making this up, this is what he asked. He asks where the nearest public restroom is. That's it. That's the last confirmed sighting. Fast forward to that evening. Kyle doesn't check in, doesn't come home, doesn't answer his phone. His family, who knows exactly what trail he was on and exactly what his timeline was, immediately raises the alarm. His vehicle is found, right where he left it, at the Waipio Lookout parking lot, completely undisturbed, locked up, just sitting there. August 31st through September 4th. Official fire and police rescue teams start searching. They cover the main trail systems on foot. They fly the area by air. 5 days, standard operating procedure for a missing adult hiker. And when they don't find anything, the official government search, as government searches often do with missing adults, gets suspended. But this is where the story gets extraordinary. Because Kyle's father, Steve Britton, was not about to let this stop. So he links up with a guy named Chris Berquist, who runs something called the Search Tech Advisory Team, or STAT, a civilian volunteer search organization that specializes in exactly this kind of scenario. And together, they launch what becomes one of the most impressive civilian search operations in modern Hawaiian history. For 24 days, 24 straight days, over 100 expert civilian hikers, rappellers dropping into ravines, FLIR thermal imaging drones scanning the canopy from above, helicopters running grid patterns, K9 tracking dogs on the ground, every technique modern search and rescue has deployed at scale on this one valley. There's even a technological breakthrough on day 12. Cellular data analysts managed to pull Kyle's phone data, and they confirm that his phone did ping at some point on the Z-Trail. But because there's only that one cell tower servicing the whole bowl of the valley, they can't triangulate a location. Traditional triangulation requires multiple towers, and there just aren't multiple towers out there. So all they have is timing data, which is highly open to interpretation. First, it points to the trail, then a data correction moves it to a remote ridge far off the established path. The search grid shifts, the rappellers re-drop, and still nothing. On September 23rd, 24 days into it, exhausted and out of viable grids to search, the family officially suspends the daily physical operation. The trail goes cold. All right, let's actually sit with this and think about it, because this case, more than almost any other I've looked at, has this quality where every logical explanation you reach for just falls apart in your hands. Let's start with the obvious one, the accidental fall. That's a 2,000-foot cliff. It's a switchback trail with unstable volcanic rock underfoot. Hikers slip, hikers fall. It's tragic, but it happens. On paper, that's the most likely explanation. But let's actually think about how a fall works. When a person falls off a trail, they don't teleport. They leave a trajectory. A snapped tree branch on the way down, scuffed dirt where their feet slipped, a water bottle bouncing away and getting caught in the undergrowth, a backpack strap catching on a root, maybe a torn piece of clothing snagged on a rock. There's a physical record of the fall. The rappelling teams specifically scoured the drop zones below the Z Trail. That was, arguably, the primary focus of the entire civilian search. They dropped in, they combed, they rappelled into ravines you cannot access any other way. And in all of that vertical searching, they found zero evidence that a human body had gone over any of those edges. No snapped vegetation showing a fall line, no dropped gear, no blood, no fabric, nothing. Okay. Second theory. He wandered off the trail and got lost. Even experienced hikers get disoriented, especially in dense jungle with heavy mist. Maybe he stepped off the path to relieve himself. Maybe he tried to shortcut back. Maybe the mist rolled in and he lost his bearings. But here's the piece that really messes with me. The K9 units. Tracking dogs are astonishing at what they do. They can track a human's scent through rain, through wind, through days-old terrain. And these were highly trained SAR dogs. If Kyle had walked off the Z Trail and pushed into the brush, he would have left a scent corridor a mile wide. The dogs would have picked it up. They would have followed it. They couldn't. The scent didn't lead them anywhere useful. It was as if his scent trail just stopped, ended, didn't continue into the deep jungle. And then there's the missing gear problem. Because this is Hawaii. Let's remember that. Hawaii doesn't have bears. There are no mountain lions. There are no wolves. There are no apex predators that drag human bodies into hidden dens and consume them along with their equipment. That's a mainland fantasy. In Hawaii, if a hiker dies in the bush, the body stays where it fell. The gear stays where it was dropped. Wild pigs can disturb remains, sure, but pigs don't relocate a heavy backpack a mile and a half from where the person collapsed. So even in a worst-case scenario where Kyle simply succumbed to exposure or an injury and died in the brush, his backpack should be exactly where he set it down. His water bottle should be there, his clothing should be there, his phone should be there, something should be there. Nothing is. And I have to mention one other layer to this, because when a search this thorough turns up this much nothing, the community starts to talk. And there are persistent local rumors. I'm not endorsing them, I'm telling you they exist, that Waipio Valley has darker elements hidden deep in its unmapped sectors. Off-grid squatters, illicit agricultural operations, people living out there who really don't want to be found, and whispers that Kyle may have stumbled onto something he wasn't supposed to see. Is there proof of any of that? No. Absolutely no proof. But it's the kind of story that starts to circulate when the physical evidence just refuses to appear. When you have 24 days of world-class searching and zero physical trace, you start reaching for explanations that step outside the boundaries of a normal accident. And then there's the smallest, oddest detail of all. The last confirmed thing Kyle Britton did was ask a stranger where the restroom was. He didn't ask about the trailhead. He didn't ask about trail conditions. He asked for the bathroom. Which raises a question the search never really answered. Did Kyle Britton ever actually make it onto the Z Trail? Or did something happen to him in that parking lot area, in the immediate vicinity of the lookout and the restrooms, that has been assumed away this entire time because we all pictured him hiking? Here's what stays with me about Kyle Britton. We live in 2019, the year this happened, with more search technology than any generation in history. Thermal drones can spot a warm body under a canopy from hundreds of feet up. Tracking dogs can follow a scent trail across miles. Rappellers can access terrain that no helicopter can see into. Cellular data can put a phone in a specific stretch of geography. We used every single one of those tools for 24 days. And it added up to nothing. His father, Steve, did everything a father could do. Chris Berquist and the STAT team did everything a search organization could do. Over 100 volunteers spent days of their lives combing that valley for a young man they had, in most cases, never met. And the Valley of the Kings, that ancient sacred canyon-walled bowl of green, kept its secret. Kyle didn't have a mental crisis. Kyle didn't have a reason to disappear. Kyle didn't have gear that would fail him. Kyle didn't have any of the vulnerabilities we usually assign to people who go missing in wilderness. He had a plan. He had a car. He had a trail. He had a family expecting him for dinner. He had board exams waiting for him the following week. And on a beautiful August morning in 2019, he asked a stranger where the bathroom was, walked away from that lookout, and every trace of his existence dissolved into the mist. The search is still, technically, an open missing persons investigation. There have been no breakthroughs, no leads, no sightings, no remains, nothing. Somewhere in the Valley of the Kings, Kyle Britton is either at rest or in a place we simply cannot see from where we're standing. Either way, the island took him whole, and it never gave anything back. Picture this: a decorated combat veteran, 82nd Airborne, served in Afghanistan, survived an explosion that gave him a traumatic brain injury and earned him a Purple Heart. He's 6 feet tall, he's built, his face and neck are covered in unmistakable, elaborate tattoos, the kind of tattoos that make it physically impossible for him to blend into a crowd. He walks into a vape shop in a small Hawaiian town on a Friday. A witness sees him walking down the main street exactly 1 week later. And then, he's gone. No body, no blood, no struggle, no footage, no phone activity, nothing. And when the FBI eventually gets involved, they discover something even worse. Kelly Gravitt is not an outlier. Kelly Gravitt is one of nearly 100 people who have vanished from the Big Island in the last 5 years alone. This is the story of Kelly Gravitt, and once you understand where he disappeared, you understand why so many others have too. Let me tell you about Pahoa, because you have to understand this town before you understand this case. If you close your eyes and picture Hawaii, you're probably picturing Waikiki, or a resort in Maui, palm trees, tiki torches, a guy in a Hawaiian shirt bringing you a Mai Tai. Pahoa is the exact opposite of that. Pahoa sits in the Puna district on the eastern side of the Big Island. Puna is essentially the Wild West of Hawaii. This is the district that got partially eaten alive by the Kilauea eruption in 2018, entire neighborhoods buried under lava. The landscape is this chaotic mix of overgrown tropical jungle and huge jagged fields of solid black lava rock. And running underneath all of it, invisible from the surface, is a network of massive subterranean lava tubes, cavernous tunnels formed by ancient magma flows. Many of them are unmapped, some of them go for miles. The town itself is a whole vibe. It's off-grid living, it's aging hippies from the 60s who never left, it's transient travelers passing through, it's combat veterans dealing with PTSD who came looking for peace and quiet, it's kava bars and open mic nights. It's also, and this part matters, it's outlaw biker gangs and a rough criminal element that has staked out its own territory in the surrounding jungles. Pahoa is where people go when they want to disappear from mainstream America. And unfortunately, Pahoa is also where some people go and never come back. Now, let me tell you about Kelly. Kelly Gravitt, 34 years old, and he is not the kind of guy who accidentally goes missing. Kelly served in the U.S. Army's 82nd Airborne Division. That's one of the most elite airborne infantry units in the American military. In 2010, during a combat deployment to Afghanistan, Kelly was caught in an explosion. He suffered a severe traumatic brain injury. He earned a Purple Heart for his service, and he came home carrying invisible wounds that the war had etched into him permanently. Physically, Kelly was imposing. 6 feet tall, about 180 pounds, Caucasian, brown hair, blue eyes, facial hair, and here's the detail that becomes really important. He had prominent, elaborate tattoos covering his face and his neck. This is a man who walks into a room, and you notice him. You do not forget him. You cannot mistake him for somebody else. He had gravitated to Pahoa because he'd found his people there. He fit into that eclectic, off-grid social scene. He was a regular at Kahena Black Sand Beach. He'd play the didgeridoo at open mic nights at a place called La Hiki Ola Kava Bar. He wasn't isolated. He was known. He was part of a community. That's who we're about to lose. Here's how it unfolds. The exact sequence gets a little fuzzy, and this is going to be a theme, because the community Kelly moved in is not exactly the kind of community that keeps meticulous records. But this is what investigators have been able to piece together. Early May 2023. Kelly is in his normal routine. He's at kava bars. He's at the beach. Nothing seems off. Then, at some point before he disappears, and this is critical, according to testimony provided by his own father, Geoff Gravitt, Kelly is violently attacked and beaten by members of a local biker gang somewhere in Pahoa. This is not a rumor. This is the direct account his father has publicly given. Kelly has a physical confrontation with organized locals, and he doesn't win. May 12, 2023. Kelly is officially last seen, in the standard on-the-record sense, at a place called Black Lava Vape in the Puna Kai Shopping Center on the 15,000 block of Pahoa Village Road. Then, a week later, on May 19, 2023, around 7 in the evening, a witness comes forward and provides a positive identification of Kelly. They saw him walking. In the area of Pahoa Village Road and Cowhale Street in downtown Pahoa. That's about a mile southeast of the vape shop. That is the last confirmed sighting of Kelly Gravitt anywhere on planet Earth. After that, silence. Complete, absolute silence. His phone stops. His social presence stops. His participation in the community stops. He just stops. His family raises the alarm. The Hawaii Police Department's area. One criminal investigation section starts a probe. They interview locals. They interview community members. They interview known associates. Given Kelly's status as a decorated combat veteran, the case draws national attention. The FBI comes in to assist. And then, in November 2024, over 18 months after his disappearance, Kelly's father, Geoff, makes a public plea for information. And he doesn't sugarcoat what he believes. He's on record saying he is grimly certain his son was murdered. By 2025 and into 2026, the case is still open. Rewards have been posted. FBI eyes are still on it, and still nothing. No physical evidence, no clothing, no didgeridoo, no phone, no body, no digital footprint whatsoever. And this is where the case explodes into something bigger. Because when investigators started really digging into missing person statistics on the Big Island, they surfaced something genuinely alarming. Kelly Gravitt is not a one-off. He is one of nearly 100 people who have vanished from the Big Island in roughly a 5-year span. 100. That is not a normal number for an island this size. That is a statistical anomaly that raises the hair on the back of your neck. All right, let's slow down and interrogate the theories. Because with Kelly Gravitt, every explanation you reach for has a fundamental problem, and that problem is Kelly himself. Theory number 1. He got lost in the woods. People wander into the Hawaiian jungle and die of exposure all the time. That's a real fact. Puna is unforgiving country. The lava fields will shred a pair of shoes. The jungle will swallow you within 20 feet of a trail. Dehydration and disorientation kill hikers on this island every single year. But now let's remember who we're actually talking about. Kelly Gravitt was 82nd Airborne, combat veteran. He had actual formal military survival training. If a guy with his background decides to go into the bush, he prepares. He carries water, he carries a knife, he carries signaling gear, he knows how to build shelter, he knows how to conserve energy. And if he ever got in trouble out there, if he sprained an ankle, if he got disoriented, he would know how to signal for help. He'd start a fire, he'd move to high ground, he'd make himself findable. Kelly doesn't just quietly walk into the jungle and quietly die. That's not how a man with his training ends up. And more importantly, Kelly's traumatic brain injury notwithstanding, there's zero credible evidence he even went into the wilderness. His last sighting was in downtown Pahoa, on a street, on foot, not on a trail, not heading into the bush. Okay, theory number 2, voluntary walkaway. Maybe the combat trauma finally caught up with him. Maybe the TBI got worse. Maybe he decided to disappear into an off-grid life somewhere and cut ties. Here's the problem with that. If you are a combat wounded veteran, your VA benefits, your medical access, your military ID, those are literally your lifelines. Those are the things that pay for your medication, your therapy, your monthly income. Nobody with a Purple Heart voluntarily walks away from that infrastructure to go live rough. It doesn't happen. It especially doesn't happen for a guy who was already living the semi-off-grid life he wanted in Pahoa. If Kelly wanted that lifestyle, he already had it. He didn't need to abandon everything to get more of it. And more importantly, look at what Kelly looks like. He is 6 feet tall. He has facial and neck tattoos so prominent that people describe them the second they describe him. He carries a didgeridoo, of all things, one of the least discreet musical instruments on the planet. This man cannot walk into an airport without being remembered. He cannot walk down a highway without being remembered. He cannot check into a homeless shelter on the mainland without being remembered. For an individual with Kelly's specific physical signature to completely vanish from public visibility means one of two things. Either somebody is deliberately hiding him, or somebody deliberately hid what was left of him. Neither of those scenarios is voluntary. Which brings us to Theory 3. Foul play. And I want to be honest, this is where the evidence, the community, and the family all seem to be pointing. The prior physical altercation with the biker gang is not a small detail. In a tight-knit off-grid community like Pahoa, disputes escalate outside the law. There is no HR department out there. There is no formal complaint process. When you get on the wrong side of an organized group, things get resolved in ways that mainland America doesn't usually see. And the presence of that documented prior assault, right before he vanished, is a screaming red flag. But even foul play has a logic gap. Kelly is 82nd Airborne. If somebody tries to jump him, he is not going down easy. He's not going down quietly. He's a trained combat soldier. He fights back. That means there should be a crime scene somewhere. Blood, signs of struggle, overturned furniture, broken glass, something. Where is it? Where's the location? Where's the physical trail? How does a coordinated ambush of a combat veteran leave zero forensic evidence anywhere on an island that is being combed by the FBI? And here's where the geography of Puna gives you the darkest possible answer. Remember those lava tubes I mentioned at the beginning? Those cavernous, unmapped subterranean tunnels running under the whole district? Following Kelly's disappearance, a horrifying rumor started circulating through Pahoa and eventually reached his father. The rumor was that Kelly had been forced into an unmapped lava tube and permanently trapped. And in Puna, a body dropped into an unmapped lava tube is a body that will functionally never be recovered, not by dogs, not by drones, not by ground-penetrating radar. The lava tubes are the perfect grave, and everyone in Puna knows it. I'm not stating that as fact. I'm stating it as what his family has publicly said they were told. And the geography makes it terrifyingly plausible. Zoom out with me for a second, because this is the part of the case that really gets under my skin. Kelly Gravitt is one man. He has a face. He has a name. He has a father named Jeff who is still making public pleas years later. But when you look at the statistical picture, when you look at those nearly 100 people who have vanished from the Big Island in a 5-year window, Kelly starts to look less like an isolated tragedy and more like a data point in something bigger. The Big Island has a missing persons problem. It has a Puna problem, and nobody in tourism marketing wants you to know about it. The Big Island is where people go to become somebody else, or where people go because somebody else wants to make them disappear. And the geography does the rest. Jungle, lava tubes, ocean cliffs, miles of terrain no one has ever fully mapped. If you wanted to design a place on planet Earth to make a person disappear permanently, you'd have a hard time doing better than the Puna district. Kelly Gravitt survived Afghanistan. He survived an explosion that would have killed most people. He earned a Purple Heart. He came home, carrying his war with him, and he found a community of people who accepted him exactly as he was. Tattoos, didgeridoo, TBI, combat scars, and all. He was rebuilding. He was finding peace. And somewhere between a vape shop on May 12th and a street corner on May 19th, that rebuild ended. A man who fought a war and came home came to a small town in Paradise and got beaten by a biker gang. And a week later, that same man, imposing, tattooed, unmistakable, was erased so completely that even the FBI cannot find a single physical trace of what happened to him. His father's still waiting. Pahoa is still whispering. The lava tubes are still keeping their secrets. And somewhere out there, in the shadows of a small Hawaiian town, a purple heart is missing its owner. Picture this. You're a brilliant 23-year-old microbiology student. You've spent months planning the trip of a lifetime. You've read the guidebooks. You've studied the trails. You've bought expensive professional-grade camping gear, the kind of gear you buy when you take the outdoors seriously. You've even gone to the trouble of legally acquiring 8 separate camping permits from the state of Hawaii, because you want to do this trip the right way. You fly to Kauai, you drive up into the mountains, you start hiking. And somewhere in the mist and the mud of one of the most beautiful state parks on the planet, you do something that no experienced backpacker would ever do. You take off your pack, you set it down in the deep brush, and you walk away from it, empty-handed, into the jungle. That is where the trail ends. 5 months later, a local hunter would find that backpack. Samuel Martinez never would. This is a case about a very smart young man making one impossible decision. And the mystery is why. Let me tell you about where this happens. Because Koki State Park is not a normal state park. Koki sits at high elevation on the western side of Kauai, right on the rim of what's called the Grand Canyon of the Pacific, Waimea Canyon. If you've never seen Waimea Canyon, imagine a mile-wide gash cut into a tropical island, 4,000 feet deep, streaked with rust red and volcanic black and impossible shades of green. It's the kind of view that stops your heart. But up on the plateau, where Koki actually sits, that's where the landscape gets deceptive. Because Koki is not just cliff overlooks and postcard vistas. Koki is a high-altitude rainforest. It's damp. It's cold at night. It's blanketed by these thick banks of fog that roll in without warning and reduce your visibility to about 10 feet in front of your face. The trails wind through dense forests of native ferns and koa trees, and just beyond those trails is the Alakai Swamp, a plateau bog with waist-deep mud, near-freezing overnight temperatures, and a canopy so thick that a helicopter can fly directly over you and never see you. And the terrain itself is a trap. The trails at Koki are lined with what looks like solid ground, but is actually a fragile lattice of ferns and root systems overhanging invisible ravines. Step 3 feet off the marked trail, and you can drop straight into a hidden gorge that a helicopter search will never spot. The vegetation is so dense that even experienced local boar hunters, people who make their living tracking pigs through this exact terrain, get turned around out there. That's Koki. Beautiful, ancient, primeval, and completely, totally indifferent to whether you live or die. Now let me tell you about Samuel. Samuel Joseph Martinez, 23 years old, from Lincoln, Nebraska. He was in the middle of studying microbiology at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. He was a serious student, analytical, curious, 6 feet tall, 180 pounds, brown hair, green eyes, physically robust, mentally sharp. And here's what I want you to hold on to about Samuel. He was not an idiot. He was not a naive tourist showing up in board shorts thinking Hawaii was a theme park. He came to Kauai to, in his own words, read, think, and explore. He wanted the biodiversity. He wanted the isolation. He wanted the wilderness. And he prepared for it. He brought high-end equipment, a black osprey backpack, a gray and green Kelty Salida tent, a bright green sleeping bag that stands out against the jungle like a signal flare. And most importantly, and this is the detail that tells you everything about who Samuel was as a hiker, he legally obtained 8 separate state camping permits. 8. For a 2-week trip. He wasn't sneaking around. He wasn't dodging rules. He was doing everything by the book. He had legal permission to camp at multiple geographically distinct locations across Kauai. That level of preparation is the mark of a serious, methodical outdoorsman, which makes what happened next even harder to explain. Here's how it unfolds. May 12th, 2021. Samuel lands on Kauai. He's ambitious about his itinerary. He starts putting his plan into motion right away. At 4:40 p.m. that same day, his cell phone registers a network ping near Waimea Canyon Drive. That tells us he's already headed up the mountain. He's driving into the high country. He's going where he said he was going. At 8:20 p.m. that night, his phone registers its final ping on the cellular network. Still in the general area of Waimea and Koki State Parks. And after that ping, silence. His phone is done. Whether the battery died, whether he dropped it, whether it got damaged, whether he just walked into a permanent dead zone, the phone is off the grid. And here's where it gets strange, because the phone stopped pinging on May 12th. But on May 13th, the next day, investigators later determined through digital forensics that Samuel recorded a video of a specific pasture on the way to Koki on his device, which means he was alive, he was functional, he was operating his phone, he was actively exploring. He just wasn't connected to the cellular network anymore because he descended into a dead zone. That video is his last known physical action on Earth. May 25th, 2021. Samuel's scheduled flight back to Nebraska departs. He's not on it. May 26th. His family, back in Lincoln, files a missing persons report. Lincoln police interface with Kauai authorities. Search and rescue operations kick off almost immediately. And here's where the 8 camping permits become an absolute nightmare. Because in his effort to be responsible, Samuel had inadvertently created a scenario where nobody could pin down where he actually was. He had legal access to camp in 8 different geographically distinct locations spread across the rugged interior of the island. He could have been in any of them. Search and rescue had no starting point, no specific trailhead, no specific ravine to prioritize. They had to spread resources thin across an enormous search area. Helicopters flew grid patterns. ATVs pushed as far into the interior as they could go. Ground teams combed the trails, and nothing. Not a boot print, not a tent, not a bright green sleeping bag flashing through the canopy. In late June, the active search was suspended. Then, on October 13th, 2021, nearly 5 months after he vanished, the breakthrough happened. A local boar hunter, deep off the beaten path in Koki State Park, stumbled across something in the brush. Samuel Martinez's black Osprey backpack. His ID was inside. His camping gear was inside. His equipment was largely intact, but Samuel was nowhere. And a renewed grid search, focused right on that backpack site, turned up absolutely nothing. Not a body, not a shoe, not a piece of torn fabric, not a trace. His remains have never been found. All right, this is where we have to sit down and actually think, because this case has one clue, the backpack, that changes everything. And once you understand what that backpack means, none of the easy explanations work anymore. Let's start with the standard theory. Samuel got lost. He got disoriented in the fog. He walked off a trail. He died of exposure or from an injury out there in the bush. Fine. That's a plausible ending for a Kauai hiker. It happens. But it does not explain the backpack. Let me explain why. In wilderness survival, there is a rule. It is a simple, universal, first page of the manual rule. If you're lost, you stay with your gear. Your backpack is not a piece of luggage. Your backpack is your survival. It has your shelter. It has your warmth. It has your food. It has your water filtration. It has your signaling devices. It has your first aid. Every second you're separated from your pack in the deep bush is a second you are actively trying to die. Samuel was a microbiology student. He was analytical. He was smart. Even if he didn't have formal survival training, he would have known, instinctively, obviously, immediately, that abandoning his backpack in the middle of Koki State Park was a fatal decision. And yet, that's exactly what he did. Okay. Second theory. He set his pack down to scout ahead. Maybe he saw a landmark, maybe he heard water, maybe he wanted to check a ridge. He took his pack off, set it down, walked forward 20 steps, and got turned around in the fog and couldn't find it again. That's plausible for about 10 seconds until you actually think about it. Because if you're scouting, you don't walk far from your gear. You walk 50 feet, maybe 100. You mark your position, you keep your pack in visual range. Even in dense Hawaiian jungle, an experienced hiker doesn't just wander off and permanently lose contact with the one bag containing everything they need to survive. And even if he did somehow lose his pack, even if the fog rolled in that fast and disoriented him that quickly, you would expect him to yell for it, to circle, to search. And if he succumbed to injury or exposure while searching, his body should be within a reasonable radius of that pack. A concentrated grid search around the discovery site should have found something. It didn't. Third theory. He fell off a cliff. Kauai has real, deadly trail edge drops. People die on this island every year from falls that get hidden beneath the fern canopy. But here's the problem with the fall theory. When a hiker falls off a trail, their pack usually goes with them. It's strapped to their back. The whole system, body and pack, goes over together. The fact that Samuel's backpack was found sitting on the ground, on solid terrain, not at the bottom of a ravine, not tangled in a cliff face, means he deliberately took it off before whatever happened next, which is the detail that keeps me up at night. Because that's a choice. That's a decision. That's Samuel Martinez, standing in the middle of Koki State Park, unclipping his shoulder straps, sliding his backpack off his back, setting it down carefully in the brush, and walking away from it. Voluntarily. Empty-handed. What could possibly cause a smart, prepared young man to do that? What did he see? What did he hear? What did he think he was chasing? Or what was chasing him? There are a few possibilities, and none of them are comfortable. Maybe he had a medical event, a psychological break, a sudden dissociative episode, a severe reaction to altitude or dehydration, and in his confused state, he wandered off. Maybe he thought he saw something in the distance he wanted to reach and set his pack down to move faster. Maybe he encountered another person out there who convinced him or forced him to leave his gear behind. And then there's the strangest part of the discovery itself. The backpack was not found in some remote, inaccessible ravine at the bottom of a 4,000-foot canyon. It was found near a known church camp in Koki, a camp that's accessible by dirt road, a place that sees regular human traffic. How does that backpack end up in a relatively populated area of the park 5 months after Samuel disappeared, when the initial searches, which absolutely covered accessible areas around church camps, turned up nothing? Two possibilities. Either Samuel himself managed to get that pack near a semi-populated area before something final happened to him, meaning he was mobile, upright, and dragging himself toward civilization when the search parties couldn't find him. Or somebody else found that pack somewhere else in the wilderness and moved it, which is a whole different kind of horror. I don't know which is true, neither does anybody else. There's also one strange piece of media noise around this case I want to mention just for completeness. Because in the earliest news reports on Samuel's disappearance, several outlets stated, incorrectly, that Samuel had been reported missing by his wife. He didn't have a wife. He was 23, he was single, he was a college student. But that error got picked up and repeated, and it launched a whole online conspiracy circus about marital disputes and insurance fraud that had absolutely no basis in reality. That noise polluted the early public conversation about this case and made it harder for real leads to surface. Here's what stays with me about Samuel Martinez. He did everything right. He researched his trip. He bought high-quality gear. He obtained legal permits. He told his family his plans. He wasn't hiking drunk. He wasn't hiking alone at night. He wasn't ignoring warnings. He was, by every measurable standard, a responsible outdoorsman preparing for a solo trip he had earned the right to take. And Kauai still swallowed him. That's the part that reframes this whole story, because we like to tell ourselves that people who disappear in the wilderness made a mistake. They were careless. They were unprepared. They didn't respect the terrain. It comforts us. It makes us feel like it can't happen to us because we'd never do what they did. Samuel Martinez did not make those mistakes, and it happened to him anyway. Kauai does not care how many permits you have. The Alakai swamp does not care about your GPA. The fog does not care that you are going to defend your thesis in a year. The mud is not impressed by your osprey pack or your Kelty tent. The island is a fortress that predates every human being who has ever set foot on it, and it is completely, terrifyingly indifferent to whether the smart, well-meaning young man wandering across its ridges makes it back to his return flight. Samuel didn't make his return flight. He didn't make his backpack. He didn't make it home. Somewhere in Koki, 5 months of Hawaiian weather washed over an unsolvable clue in the brush. A hunter found the pack. His family got their ID card back, and whatever it was that made Samuel Martinez take that pack off his shoulders and walk empty-handed into the mist, that answer stayed exactly where he left it. In the mud, in the fog, in the silence of a rainforest that has been keeping its secrets for millions of years and is still keeping his. Picture this: you're a physical therapist, a yoga instructor, 35 years old, in the best shape of your life, living your dream in upcountry Maui. It's a beautiful May afternoon. You lace up your shoes for a quick trail run in a park you've been to before, a park most locals consider almost aggressively normal. Loop trails, signage, casual day hikers with dogs. You drive there, you park, you step into the woods, and you don't come out. Not that afternoon. Not that night, not that week. For 17 days, hundreds of volunteers, professional trackers, scent dogs, and helicopters tear that forest apart looking for you, screaming your name and finding absolutely nothing. On day 17, when the search is transitioning from rescue mission to body recovery, a helicopter crew spots something in a ravine. A tiny figure waving her arms, barefoot, 20 pounds underweight, a broken leg, sunburned to the bone. Alive. This is the story of Amanda Eller, and it is one of the very few Hawaii disappearance cases that ends with a person walking out of the jungle instead of vanishing into it forever. Let me tell you about the Makawao Forest Reserve. Because to understand why this case is so unbelievable, you have to understand how ordinary this park is supposed to be. Makawao sits on the upcountry slopes of Haleakala, the massive volcano that dominates East Maui. If you've driven upcountry on Maui, you know the vibe. Cool air, rolling green pastures, horses, old cowboy towns. The whole area is high enough that it feels less like a tropical island and more like the Pacific Northwest. And Makawao Forest Reserve is right in the middle of this pleasant, temperate, casually beautiful part of the island. The trails inside Makawao are, by Hawaiian standards, tame. You've got the Kahakapau Loop system, well-marked, well-maintained, popular with local trail runners, hikers, mountain bikers, and families with dogs. There's a parking lot, there's signage, there are people. It is not the Kalalau Trail. It is not the Alakai Swamp. It is the friendly park, the safe park, except. And this is the whole story right here, except that Makawao has a very specific kind of danger built into it, and it's a danger that hides in plain sight. The trails feel manicured, but the forest reserve itself is huge. Thousands of acres of dense, layered tropical undergrowth, towering eucalyptus trees, waist-high ferns, slippery mud. And running through all of it, hidden by the canopy from above and by the vegetation on the ground, are these deep plunging ravines. Dry creek beds that turn into raging torrents in a flash flood, steep slopes covered in loose earth, terrain that looks two-dimensional from the trail, but is actually a violent three-dimensional maze the moment you step off the path. 20 feet, that is genuinely all it takes. 20 feet off the marked trail, and you can drop into a labyrinth that will consume you. Now let me tell you about Amanda. Amanda Eller, 35 years old. She lived in the little town of Haiku on Maui. She was a physical therapist by day, a yoga instructor. She was in peak physical condition, and she had a really important professional detail. As a physical therapist, she had clinical training in anatomy, biomechanics, and human physiological limits. She understood, in a way most people don't, exactly what a body can and cannot survive. Mentally, Amanda was spiritual. She trusted her intuition. She felt a deep connection to nature. She wasn't a reckless person, but she was somebody who moved through the world guided by her gut. That detail is going to matter more than you'd expect. May 8, 2019. Amanda has a completely normal morning. Surveillance video from around Haiku catches her running errands. She stops by the post office to mail a Mother's Day package. She swings into a local market and buys some tea and a power bar. Totally routine. This is not a woman in crisis. In the afternoon, she drives her white Toyota RAV4 up to the Makawao Forest Reserve. She parks in the lot. She's planning a short trail run. And then she does something that, in retrospect, seems like a small choice, but becomes the entire foundation of this case. She leaves her cell phone in the car. She leaves her wallet in the car. She leaves her water bottle in the car. She leaves her car keys. And this is the strange part, hidden just outside the vehicle. Not on her body, not in the ignition, hidden outside. And she disappears into the woods. Evening comes. Amanda doesn't come home. Her boyfriend, Ben Conkol, waits. Nothing. Overnight passes. May 9th, 7:21 a.m. Ben officially reports Amanda missing to the Maui Police Department, and when police arrive at the Makawao trailhead and find her RAV4 sitting empty in the parking lot with her phone, wallet, and water bottle inside, the public reaction is immediate and unanimous. This is not a lost hiker. This is an abduction. Somebody grabbed her. Somebody took her out of the parking lot. That's what everybody thought. What follows is one of the largest civilian search operations in modern Hawaiian history. Hundreds of volunteers pour in. Tracking dogs deploy across the trail systems. Helicopters fly overhead. Drones cut through the canopy. Over $70,000 gets raised to fund the search. Ben, her boyfriend, becomes the immediate target of internet suspicion, as boyfriends of missing women always do, but he passes a police polygraph and is quickly, unequivocally cleared. He wasn't the story. Days pass, then a week, then 2 weeks, and there's no sign of Amanda anywhere. Now, and I want you to really hold this in your head, she was inside that forest the entire time, fighting for her life. She had stepped off the trail briefly to rest. She sat on a fallen log. She closed her eyes, and she meditated. She's very specific about this later. She didn't fall asleep. She meditated. And when she opened her eyes, she stood up, and her spatial awareness was just gone. She started walking, and she walked in the wrong direction, deep into the ravines, into the maze. By the time she realized how lost she was miles from the trail, in terrain that swallowed her. She survived by drinking stream water. She ate wild raspberries. She ate strawberry guavas. She ate exactly 2 moths. 2. She lost her shoes in a sudden flash flood that swept through her ravine. She then fell off a 20-foot cliff, severely fracturing her leg and tearing the meniscus in her knee. At night, when the mountain temperatures dropped toward freezing, she found a muddy depression where a wild boar had bedded down, a warm indentation in the earth, and she climbed into it and covered herself with fern fronds to trap her body heat. For 17 days, May 24th, day 17, a volunteer helicopter crew, pilot Pete Voorhes of Windward Aviation, with spotters Chris Berquist, Javier Cantelops, and Troy Helmer, is flying over a deep ravine that hadn't been prioritized in prior searches, and they see something. A tiny figure in a creek bed, between 2 waterfalls, waving her arms. It's Amanda, emaciated, injured, sunburned, barefoot, 20 pounds lighter than when she went in, but alive. All right? Let's actually break this case down. Because even after we know how it ends, the individual pieces of this story don't quite make sense on their own. Let's start with the left-behind items. The single most important reason the public latched onto abduction, as the theory was because of what Amanda left in her car. And on its face, they're right to be suspicious. Because if you're going for a trail run in Hawaiian heat, why on earth would you leave your water bottle behind? That's the basic thing. That's the one thing you take. And the phone is even weirder. In 2019, a woman running alone on a trail without her phone is doing something almost nobody does. Phones are safety devices. Phones are how you call for help. Phones are how you get GPS if you get turned around. Amanda deliberately left it in the car. And then there's the car key. This is the one that really twisted the case. She hid it just outside the vehicle. Now, for athletes, this is actually a somewhat common thing. You don't want to carry a bulky key on a run, so you stash it somewhere on the outside of the car. But to the public, and to police, that detail read as ominous, like she was expecting somebody to pick her up, like she was making the car retrievable for someone other than herself. The abduction theory made complete sense given those details, and it was completely wrong. Which brings us to the search grid paradox. This is the part that still baffles professional search and rescue experts. Because look at the resources deployed here. Hundreds of volunteers physically walking the trail systems, highly trained scent dogs, helicopters flying grid patterns, drones. And this isn't the Na Pali coast. This is a contained forest reserve. It's finite, it has a boundary, it has trails cutting through it. And for 16 straight days, this massive coordinated search apparatus scoured the Makawao forest and did not find a living woman who was actively trying to be found. Think about that. Amanda wasn't hiding. She wasn't in a cave. She wasn't unconscious. She was screaming. She was waving. She was doing everything a lost person does when they hear searchers, and the searchers were right there. Some of the volunteers, in interviews later, said they had passed within a few hundred yards of where she was. How? How does that happen? How does a person get missed for 16 days in a park that hundreds of trained searchers are combing? The answer is the ravines. Once Amanda dropped into that maze of steep canopied gorges, she was invisible from the air, invisible from the trails, and her voice was muffled by waterfalls and vegetation. The forest reserve looks small on a map. In 3 dimensions, with all of its hidden vertical geometry, it is enormous, and it hides people. Which brings us to the third logic gap. The disorientation. Amanda later gave a very specific account of what happened. She sat on a log to rest. She closed her eyes. She meditated. When she opened them, she couldn't find the trail. She started walking. And every time she tried to turn around and head back the way she thought she came, something would happen. A branch would fall. She'd stub her toe. She'd trip on a root. She interpreted this in her spiritually attuned way as the universe telling her not to go back. So she kept going forward. Now, and I want to be really careful here, I'm not going to sit here and tell you whether that was divine intervention or confirmation bias. That's not my department. What I will tell you is that as a physical mechanism, the disorientation itself is real, well documented. Studies of lost hikers show that once you're spun around, especially in dense forest, your ability to retrace your steps collapses almost instantly. You end up walking in circles, or worse, in a completely wrong direction, absolutely convinced you're heading back toward where you came from. Amanda walked, over the course of her ordeal, an estimated 3+ miles in the wrong direction, over jagged ravines, through flash floods. She wasn't stupid. She wasn't reckless. She was a fit, intelligent physical therapist with a clinical understanding of the human body. And the jungle still spun her compass so badly that she walked miles away from the trail she knew. That's the real horror of this case. Not that she was abducted. She wasn't. It's that a smart, capable woman got so completely swallowed by 20 feet of misplaced steps that she couldn't find her way back for 17 days. I want to end on the piece of Amanda's story that most true crime coverage skips over. Because after she was rescued, after she was in the hospital, after her survival made international news, something ugly happened. A vocal contingent of internet skeptics decided the whole thing had to be a hoax. They claimed her electrolyte levels on admission were suspiciously perfect. They claimed she'd been secretly hiding at rescuer Javier Cantelop's house the whole time. They claimed it was a stunt for a future book deal, and rescuers had to publicly, angrily defend her. Because they were the ones who saw her when she came out. They saw the severe leg fracture. They saw the emaciation. They saw the tissue burns on her feet from days of walking barefoot on lava rock and hot creek beds. They saw the ravine she was in and knew that no human being was staging that. The hoax theory was garbage. But it tells you something about the shape of the modern internet, that even when a woman does the impossible and survives 17 days in a jungle, a certain kind of person online cannot accept a miracle without trying to tear it apart. Amanda Eller's survival is genuinely the exception, not the rule. For every Amanda who walks out of a Hawaiian forest, there are Kiara Henrys, Samuel Martinez's, and Kyle Britton's who don't. She is the one who made it. And the reason her story matters isn't because it has a happy ending. It's because it perfectly illustrates the terrifying thinness of the line between a beautiful afternoon and a fight for your life on these islands. She parked her car in a friendly upcountry parking lot on a beautiful May afternoon. She stepped into a forest she'd been in before. She got a little tired. She sat down for a minute. She closed her eyes to meditate. And when she opened them, she was in a completely different world. 17 days, 2 moths, 1 broken leg, 1 boar's bed, and 1 helicopter on the last possible day the search would have continued that just happened to fly over the exact ravine she had crawled into. Hawaii, in the end, gave Amanda Eller back. But make no mistake about the thing you should take from her story. Hawaii, more often than not, does not give people back. She was one of the lucky ones, and luck, in that jungle, is a much thinner thing than any of us like to believe.